COVID. I almost wore my CodeCamp t-shirt or Philly.net t-shirt. I used to be on the junior member on the executive board of Philly.net, which is one of the largest in the country. So they're good to go to, a lot of free swag, but a lot of learning. So what do we got here? Got it. All right. So I'm going to close this one. How do we shrink this bad boy? No, I mean, how do I shrink this? Huh? Is there minimize? No. All right. Whatever. Let's do this. Just want to get some real estate back here. All right. So let me get organized here. So welcome everyone. I'm Ron Garlitt. Most of you kind of know me. I'm the loudmouth old guy of the group. Little history. I was doing some math earlier today, and I've been doing this over 40 years. I've been in the field one way or another. I started in military. Well, I started in electronics when I was 15 with my father, vacuum tubes. Ended up in the military. My primary MOS was combat photographer, and one of the many other ones was electronics. Got out of there, off active duty, went and got my civilian certification in digital electronics and microprocessor technology. I ended up heading up a biomedical electronics group for a research hospital for 17 years. Went to work for AstraZeneca, writing analytical software that analyzed the blind studies that they do for drugs, that kind of analysis that they do. I wrote software that helped report it. I didn't write the analytical stuff. I had a bunch of statistical people on that, but I wrote the code that pulled all that functionality together. I've been a manager of applications development for a startup. Tip: don't invest your own money in a startup. That's why I'm still working with them. So I've done a couple startups. I worked for American Express as lead technical architect and an enterprise architect. I've written probably almost every kind of software except phone system at that point, some point. As an architect there, and what I'm going to get into in here, disclaimer, there was a course I took in 2013 from Jack Porte. In order to finish this application, you will see a note on some of the pages where some of the material and examples, I give credit to Jack because I was in I needed to get this done. Last night I finished getting it done. So the pages where I directly ripped the examples and modified them from my code here is his work as far as the examples go. And you'll see the little notation there. Give credit. I did have to modify it and port it over. This application is running in Node.js, Visual Studio. Who's a web developer here? Okay, who codes in a strong type language like Java, C#? And who are just newbies learning? Okay, this is the right place for everyone. Okay, I don't code. I have yet to write a full application in JavaScript. I left American Express when I was going to be transferred to Phoenix. They wanted me to go to Phoenix, and I turned it down, and I took the package. They were converting all the C# and Java or .NET and Java stuff into this hybrid paths they spent a couple $100 million on, and I hear it still doesn't work correctly. Because Node is JavaScript on the server. And I'm not going to go too far down the tangent, but all it is this fancy old event loop. There's all kinds of things they make it do faster to run on the server and things like that. And it's just this loop you're running and you're doing asynchronous calls. For everyone who understood what I just said, that's good. If not, don't worry about it. Okay, the point is it's written in JavaScript, which is basically for lack of a proper term, a scripting language, interpreted language, Python's interpreted, all that. Some of you have heard me say it before. You all like the web, but every time I'm in an argument with somebody who's a web person, I say, would you like your flight control systems on your plane to be written in JavaScript? That kind of ends the discussion, and I say, but the web is fun, which is why I have this example, because I need to brush up on my JavaScript. 5 years ago, roughly, before I came here, and this is actually the extension of that, the original presentation I gave in 2018, 2 days after I started at 21st Century Oncology, where Marcos works. We used to work together. I now work, I'm 6 months now at Florida Gulf Coast University. They gave me some really long title, but I'm in enterprise applications. So that's where we're at. Now, why are you all here? You're all here to learn as much as the commonality with user groups. Okay, and when I go to a user group meeting, especially after the one I did with Mike Long, who does the cybersecurity stuff and all that, on the cyber range in Arizona, that was really cool. I want to go do and try whatever I go learn. And this is generally what happens. I watch the expert, goes really well, and I got to go home and try it. And this is about how things usually go, and it's going to happen for you too. All right. So what are design patterns? All right. You'll hear terms. How many here understand object-oriented programming? Raise your hands. Okay, that's good. That's excellent. If you don't worry about it. What happens we have design patterns, and it's just a way of talking. Now, I swore I wouldn't go down the sexist sounding one, but you have a couple. They recently married, they're going to buy a house. And this is Florida. We want to get a house built, don't we? So they went and go and find some property, and they want to build a house. So what's the first thing you do? Well, you usually end up talking to an architect. And I guess we all understand what an architect does. And then he's usually the architect who drew up the blueprints and everything. And there's usually a developer involved. The developer of the community where they're going to have the house built at. This is the nomenclature that we basically use in IT. We have programmer titles and stuff like that, but out in the industry, the full-blown programmers that are writing full stack applications generally have a title of developer these days, and you either see engineer or architect tossed in there. And a lot of times that depends on what kind of software they're developing. Those are little changes that come in. But you see how those words kind of mean things. If I say developer, you kind of understand what it is. Even if you're not an IT person, you go developer. Well, what kind of developer is it? Is he a home builder? You can just go and imagine. The point is, words kind of mean things. It's an abstract image it forms in your head. And that's what design patterns are about. So if you have a house you want to build, well, we sit down, husband and wife sit down with the architect and the developer, and they go, I want to build a house. So he goes, what kind of house do you want? Well, it's a building, with 4 main walls, and little jumping walls here and stuff like that. The point is, building is a pattern. Well, how many kinds of buildings are there? There's skyscrapers all the way down to the little shed out back of your home, possibly, or around the corner in the back of the building that's holding the trash. The point is, I say building to you, that's a pattern that you readily have in your head. Likewise, if you get into the house. So now we have the house, we're getting the design going. Well, it's going to have 3 bedrooms, it's got to have a kitchen, it's got doors and windows. Those are all patterns. A room is a pattern. We talk about a room, you instantly know it's a space within this bigger space. It's blocked off. You know what windows are? That's a pattern. What comes down to the end of it, after all these patterns, we can still talk because everybody knows when you say certain words, like a window or a door, we can talk door. The trick is in the implementation. All right. These are an interesting set of doors. All right. I'm having a house built, or I've had 2 houses built in the past, but I'm talking to my wife, and well, what you get into this, what kind of door do we want on the front? All right. Well, I like this door. She likes this door, and this door. Can't really tell if I want 3 windows in it, a big round window in it. Okay. But each of those are patterns. The door is a pattern, but within it are sub patterns. Could have a window in it. Has a little hole for a doorknob, right? Has a place for hinges. Well, what kind of hinges? What kind of doorknob? Those are implementation details, but the basic structure is that pattern. And that's what we're going to do here. We're going to talk patterns. So some of these are original slides from 5 years ago. I did a rant on data storage. We're going to skip that. What's the first monitor in the world? This is the first monitor in the world that I know about. We all had to have some way of putting that image up there. So through the years, it's something new and experienced programmers need to understand. All right, let's skip through. Basically, I'm using a really cool word here called lingo. It says the lingo, phrases, whatever the term is for today. The little guy here is probably thinking, what the heck's a lingo? He says he's probably, it's just an abstract slang word, but you all get the general idea. If I say lingo, you're saying he's talking about some kind of language thing. All right, but that's the point. It's abstract. So patterns are basically abstract images that form in your head when we talk about things. So let's zip along here. So there's many groups of design patterns. Today there are cloud design patterns. All right, whoops, what did I hit this thing in automatic? There's cloud design patterns. Now let me pause this. What's going on here? Oops. F5. No, don't move. Okay, the mouse is probably moving too. So cloud patterns. All right. All right. We're playing with my mouse. Let's see if it goes to the next one. At any rate, you'll see the links on here. The PowerPoint at some point will be available. All the code here, I'll make the GitHub. I just made it publicly available, moved it into the main branch, and everyone can grab the code. All you'll have to do is install Node.js on your machine. I'm assuming most of you use Visual Studio Code. You'll be able to bring this up and run. All right. Okay. So you have cloud design patterns, and that's what it was. See, the cloud design pattern just wanted to float away because I don't care about that right now. My big shtick was enterprise design patterns. I got to get this out of here. How do you shrink this? Well, it helps a little bit. Yeah. All right. Can I drag it to the side? Oh, yeah, that's really useful. Did I mention before I'm a Teams person? I drink the Microsoft Kool-Aid. You'll hear that a few times too. So Martin Fowler wrote a book. Well, books, papers. I've seen him present once, maybe twice. I can't remember. That's that long ago. He has a book that discusses enterprise design patterns. Good reading. If you're going to be working as a professional programmer, career programmer, this is your life. That's something you should, are we frozen? There we go. You should look into enterprise integration patterns. Where Marcus and I worked was basically integration. So the software did a lot more, but integration. One of the tools I'm using now is is called Boomi, which is a cloud integration platform. I'm an SSIS, SQL Server Integrations person. I've done Informatica and stuff like that. Those are apps for running here and on a server. Boomi is, I call it a lightweight version in the cloud of SSIS, so to speak. It runs in a browser. It's pretty cool. I just got certified in that, did a couple of certifications for it for the university. But enterprise design patterns, it's about integration. You know, integrating stuff with one company to another. There's patterns for that. There's domain patterns. I don't know why I never put an image on this one, but how many here have heard of domain-driven design? All right, domain DDD. Love that stuff. These are links. So all these links in here work. I think I retested them all, but go check them out when you get this code or the PowerPoint. You should check them out. And if you're wanting to learn, this is where you start. Now, I'm a database person at heart. Yeah.
Under the more button there on the right, should be
Where? Where? Sweet. Thank you very much. Jeff, right?
Yeah.
All right. All right. So yeah, data model and design patterns. By the way, this. Wait a minute here. Let me jump back. The mouse is freaking out now. See, you confused my laptop. She confused my laptop. She used the trackpad. I never used that because like, what's that? All right. So where was it? All right. Now, Control F5. Control F5. That's what I did to fix it after she did it before. There we go. All right. This is one of the advanced courses I took with Jack. And actually, I don't know whether he was a partner or a minion, but Dan McClellan. Jack owns the company called Data Object Factory. They have some really sweet courses, and I looked recently, and apparently this course that I ripped a few of the things from here, and these courses have all been updated. This is for the database freak in the group. It covers all the different types of design patterns, including the mother of data pattern, which nobody implements. Okay, things of that nature. So if you're a data freak, this is something that, and you're into databases, this is a course to take. Modern JavaScript design patterns. There's a list of them. We're only going to talk about 2 of them. That's all I had time to plug in for. And that's all. And the 2 that I talk about are the ones I mainly use when I'm playing around in JavaScript. And I don't play around in JavaScript that much, mostly for fun. Okay. So this is the same thing. JavaScript design patterns. There's a few links there. You can see we have the module pattern down there and the revealing module pattern and the prototype. But yes, we'll get into that in a little bit. But in the beginning, there was the gang of 4. Okay, so let's jump over here a minute. So in the beginning, there was the gang of 4. This book here, the link is here. Granted, it's a Chinese version on a hide site, but it's still live. That's what this is. This is the gang of 4. It was the basic, these 4 guys got together. They called them the gang of 4. Their names are written down there. There was Gamma, Helms, Johnson, and the other guy. I never met any of them in person. I did have to read the book. When I read the book, it was in Java. The original book was written, I believe it was written in Java first, for Java first, but they've been spawned in other languages. C, my original language was assembler in C, ANSI standard C. And then I skipped over C++ and went to Visual Basic. And then I started in C# before it was released, because I knew people at Microsoft and all that. And I see, so C# is my primary language. Okay, and I can see very clearly, or at least I used to. So, but this is a book. It's here in PFD, the link to it. It's worth reading. It's written in English. This one here, because it is linked to a China site. Okay, so you'll see here, this is the home page of the app. This is actually, I took a course in Room with Jack and Dan. And this was, they now sell this as, this is their sell product, but the course was actually this whole thing that's packaged up there. So you'll see, this is the app. It's running in Visual Studio Code. You'll see down here in the bottom. I'm going to stop this a minute. If you look at the terminal in the bottom window, whoops, what I hit? RS. I restart. Oh man, helps to make sure you're on the right screen, right? All right, I'm just gonna down in the terminal window. So if I hit RS, I already have my web server running. I'm using Node Manager and a few things. So how many here know Node, understand Node.js? Okay, so like I said, all this works. So when you pull this down, it would be a good place to start. It's Node.js. I'm using Express, which is the web server, web technology behind it, and embedded JavaScript or EJS, which is the templating engine. I'm using Bootstrap. So these are all things the newbies will want to dig into. You'll be able to look at this. I have the routing working. Here's the routing. It's all written in JavaScript. So everything in here is JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. CSS, I don't do CSS. I use Bootstrap because I'm lazy and I like it. Okay, so this would be good code to run down. So what it is, you'll spin this up and then you'll go to the browser and say, I'm going to start reading. So I've organized it as the Modern Design Patterns, and I'm going to circle back on those. Okay, because you're actually going to see them in use. You have the creational patterns, the structural patterns, the behavioral patterns. Now, Joe Mead's not here. I brought this book. This is Design Patterns in C#, written by Stephen Metzger. May he rest in peace. He, back in 2018, Joe knew him better. He knew him. And I only met him a couple of times, but he passed away sometime before that. But this is his book. Now, I talk about creational patterns, structural patterns, and behavioral patterns, but all the newer books have evolved. No matter who you go to, most of them go and expand that. So you'll hear these patterns underneath the different patterns. They break them into subgroups, like responsibility patterns would be a subgroup under behavioral, so to speak, and things like that. A lot of people group them differently, the operation patterns and stuff like that. I'm a purist. The Gang of Four said creational, structural, and behavioral. So the definition, which I don't have on the screens here, let me flip over here, and this is to keep me coherent. So creational patterns. So like I said, object-oriented programming. I started in assembler in C. Well, we were writing procedural code. All right. The language evolved. Okay, languages have evolved because we needed to do things. Everybody understands public variables, global variables. Raise your hand. Get a little interaction here. They're bad, aren't they? And if you don't think they're bad, take my word for it. Okay, so there's a lot of things we've done, and that's what led to, in the object-oriented languages, the development of classes. And in classes, you have accessors, getters and setters. You have accessibility scope things. They've got a slightly different turn on it. They're called, what's the exact name for it? Accessors. Okay, or public. What is it? Defined scope. You'll have like private. You'll have friendly. You'll have protected. You'll have public. Access modifiers. Yes. So that's why I have this here, and it's written down here. It's just I didn't want to look for it. But yeah. So your access modifiers. Well, there's a problem. JavaScript. Everything ends up in the global area. So now you can imagine with JavaScript, I want to use this library here. It might be jQuery. And I might want to use React. Then I might want to use this, and I might want to use that. There's this really cool widget. You start loading these all in there, and all of these variables and stuff are all in the global space, and they start walking on one another. So that started happening a lot early on. People started doing things. And jQuery did a bunch of stuff. Well, I'm going to use $, and I'm going to kind of get everything in there. And they kind of did sort of a namespace, but these are things to avoid. So let me jump back to modern design patterns a minute here. So let's go start there. Modern design pattern in JavaScript. And do I need to make this text bigger? Let's see. All right. You can read it, don't read it. What you need to know about this is it goes and this is one of the things where you can avoid collisions. All right. So now you can take all your own little, and you're going to see that here. You're going to take all your code that you write in JavaScript, and there's a handy little function in here that we give you. It's pretty standardized. There's other variations on Stack Overflow. Okay. That allow you to pull everything in to a certain variable. So this is a cool little piece of this function right here. So you set yourself up a variable. I'm gonna make that a little bigger there. Oh, it's not gonna let me do that. You'll see this JS gang of 4. I'm making a variable, right? Well, I'm setting, and in there I've got this namespace function. And that's a tried and true formula where you have that little module there. And what it does, it allows you to go down here and create a namespace. So now you can have a bunch of script files that you're writing for this project. It might be your little data access ones, and you might have a little one for validation and things of that nature. But what it is since you're writing everything in JavaScript because you're cool and you love JavaScript, and that's how it was about 10 years ago. You were cool if you were doing JavaScript. You go in here and you go, well, I'm going to make a namespace. I'm going to call it classic. And inside the classic, I'm going to add this module. Now here I have template because I'm using the template. Here I used an example from the template method, which is a design pattern we'll show you in a little bit. But in here, we could call that one DA for data access. That'll be our data access module. And in there, we start assigning functions to it. All right. Raise your hand if I confused you. All right. So same here. If you scroll down, I've got another one. It's still the JS gang of 4. Another namespace I'm calling utils. All right. And for those who have never done object-oriented programming like Java or C#, we have the concept of namespaces there. It's namespaces of Java, right? Yeah. It's C# it is. Like I said, it's my primary. Namespaces help you separate all these cool little blocks of code. And you have, in this case, you'll see a namespace, and that common is the common module. All right. And what you see is we have in this module here, right here, I'm doing a basic revealing pattern. We'll see it in the next page, but it's one of the module patterns. All right. So in here, I'm adding a thing called inherit. And I got this little function here. Same here, I got my little log function. I want to add that to the utilities. So what's cool? How do we use that? All right. Well, think of these as usable classes. I like to think of modules or the little functions in there. So because I'm object-oriented, that inherit, that function, what I'm really doing is I'm tricking JavaScript into doing a class called inherit. Okay. Who's heard of TypeScript? Raise your hands if you know what TypeScript's doing under the covers. In a nutshell, all these JavaScript patterns I'm talking to and not going to show you all of them. There's different versions of ECMAScript, which is the standard for JavaScript. And I don't remember what number it's up to now. I haven't been keeping tabs. But they've standardized the TypeScript language, and you type what you want, and then you tell the transpiler, right? Yeah, whatever, transpiler, because it translates. It'll translate what you've written in TypeScript into whatever version of ECMAScript, which is a JavaScript standard, that you want to use, like, well, we're coding everything in TypeScript 2015. You write in TypeScript, it'll convert all that stuff that you wrote object-oriented into JavaScript, and it's using these patterns, revealing module pattern. It's relying on the fact that there's this craziness in Java. Who here knows what function closure is? Or it's IIFE, immediately, whatever, because I always call it function closure or closure. Most people refer to it as closure now, but the exact term is immediately invoked function expression. We call it function closure for the most part. There's a little glitch in the way this works, because every language kind of has a this, or some languages have a this. The way it works in JavaScript and the way things get, when a function is written, gets put into that global memory space. It allows us to make it, it has to do with the way memory is reclaimed and stuff like that. If you want to know more, there's links floating around in here and elsewhere on it. But what you need to know is, because of this little glitch, I call it a glitch. Some people now swear it's by design. Because they're adding class to JavaScript. And one of the complaints right now is the way we do it here works better than the class because it still doesn't handle private variables correctly in JavaScript. So what you can see is they're actually trying to take JavaScript and make it strongly typed, or work more like an object-oriented or proper language that has all these safeguards. And that's what we're doing here. So when I see this module here, module common, I'm adding to it a class inherit and a class log, just like I would in a strong type language, except I'm tricking it out so that I can do this. And what it is it gives me a private variable that's protected. And if you see, when I run this sample here, another little trick in JavaScript, you see I'm doing a var utils, and I'm calling out my whole namespace like that. Dirty little secret with Java. If I put utils and then I make another call with it fully spelled out, JS gang of 4 and all that, and then I call, say, the log function, the one that's the little one that says utils will actually execute quicker, because in C# or in C++ or C terms, it's basically a little pointer that's pointing. So if you have this huge stack of global variables, because every function is on this global stack in JavaScript. I'm pointing at the wall, people, sorry. Those in Zoom, you can't see me, it's embarrassing. So you have this global stack, and in there, it's all there. Well, it has to nest through, starting at the top, and it goes, finds JS gang of 4 and starts looking down it. Well, the little util, when you do it like that, that first variable declaration, it saves a reference point. So while the little util remembers where to start, if you call it straight out, it still has to go through that whole thing. That's what kind of stuff is going on in your browser in JavaScript, people. Okay, remember, it's all synchronous. You know, you have this event loop running. I'm talking node and all that kind of stuff. All it is you have this big circle that's running, and you're doing everything in callbacks, and it's going around this loop, and it's single threaded. It's not like a strong type language like C# or whatever, where you can have multiple threads firing off everywhere. It's just going around there, and it's making a list. I got to call back to here. I got to call back to here. I got to call back to here. Well, same thing's going. When it has to look things up, it's going through this huge stack. So when I run this, you'll see if I hit the button, bang, it executes. I'm just doing an alert box. That's all the little log function does here. But what I'm doing here is, and we'll cover this if we get into the template thing. Basically, I've used the namespace to write all this. It's allowed me to neatly organize my code, and it's preventing collisions. And how's it preventing collisions? Let's take a look here. All right. Is this the one I want to show? Yes. Okay. If we look at the screen there, everyone can see that? All right, that's the top of the global scope I was talking about. This is where all the variables, where everything is. And what's that dollar sign, people? That dollar sign there is jQuery. If you go into the debugger, you run this code and you go into, I'm using Chrome here, hit F12, get in there and you start snooping for all this stuff. You can go down that dollar sign and you'll go, oh my God, this is jQuery. Because when you type in, what do you use? The dollar sign. JS Gang of 4, that's our space. And you'll see I expanded it out there. You see the classic modules collapsed. You'll see the utilities is open and there's the common module. And underneath it, there's my inherit and there's my log. Okay, let's go back up to this code. All right, we look at this. There's my utils. And in there, in the utils is the log and it's the inherit module. Now I come down here to data store and that's over in the template module, okay, which we declared up there. And what's in there? There's the data store, you see it? So it's just like a class in object-oriented programming. I've shoved that into there and that into there. So now I can use them. And then I set up a MySQL because in the utilities, I'm going to do the inherit. I'm saying take this class and shove that data store that I just got from the template piece of code and shove it in that MySQL. Okay, and whatever information it took to do that. So now this is basically saying, well, what's the stuff? And I have to go over to the template. Did I show it up here? Let's go back up in the code. So if you look, the data store, it has a thing called process. And in the process, it has a connect, a select, and a disconnect. And then it returns true. Okay, this is all high level, but you get the general idea. So now we've created that. Now we got this MySQL all pumped up, ready to go with all the classes and stuff it needs. Now it says, let's go. And now I'm going to call util log. And in there, I've called connect and it's going to pass in that message. It says, add this message to the connect. And you have to go look at the code to see what it does. Same here, because all I'm just doing is writing stuff. It's not really connecting to MySQL or pretending. But in here, here's the select. There's another one, step, select step, connect step. Down here's disconnect. And this is all set up, but it isn't until I run process here that it actually executes. All right. Just like we're declaring code, we're just declaring our code here. And then when we call MySQL.process, we'll show the log. And in here, all this code above, you'll see in the log, whenever add's called, it's adding it to this variable right here. Or where is it? Do I see it? Message. So it all gets added to this message that it's holding in memory because of that function closure, because we're using the revealing module pattern or the basic module pattern. This is more revealing module pattern. To have that private variable space. And it isn't until we're all done does that get destroyed. So it's still there. We have this private variable that's safe and hidden somewhere out on the global stack, but only it knows where to find it. Okay. So when it runs, you'll see that it just wrote the messages out. It just went and looked up message. That's what the whole utils log show was about. Simplistic, but that's the pattern. And this is the general pattern you want to write. So let's go back up here. That's a namespace. Let's delve a little more into the revealing module pattern, because that's what basically what we're using. Here I got a little chatter we wrote on the screen. Not going to read it out loud, but here I'm talking about, there it is, IIFE. Supposed to look that up, but I forgot. But yeah, so this is all about this enclosure. But as you can see here, I'm in the debugger in Chrome, and you'll see you can put your breakpoints in. And then when process was called further down the road, okay, once it started executing the various points, it stopped in these modules. So you can go and stop and hover over and see what's going on. All right, in the debugger. And you see you have here's my breakpoints. You can see I had a bunch of them in here. And as you can see over here in the scope, here's the local, and you can see the message that's being built out. And there's this part that's tied to the closure. And you'll see it's starting to add, it's stopped midstream. So it's still adding everything into this message. Had I gone another couple iterations, you'd see the message built out a little bigger. Okay. But that's what's going on here, the revealing module pattern. You'll see it's basically the same block of code. How original was I? All right. It's the same code I just explained in the namespace pattern, except I have more comments in it. Okay, here I'm elaborating. Let's look at it now. In here, and here's the namespace a little better, and here's that private area that we're setting up. And in that private area, we're setting up inherit, we're setting up log. These are those classes, or my make-believe classes. There's got to be, that's the name I'm giving them, that I can use over and over again. And here's where it gets revealed. So we do the return. So this is kind of the public area. So whatever you put in the return, you could also put other variables in there. So you could have hidden variables up here that you could be loading with all kind of information. Like besides this inherit, I could have had connection string. I could have had this, I could have had that. And they're private. And the only way you get at them is if you reveal them. So I could have put down here, I could have put connection. And then the colon, and then the name of the private variable up there. So it doesn't have to be the same name. It's just one of those cool things you can do. That's why I got that little note there. In this way, you can standardize on it, and you could develop yourself a reusable library. Imagine a library in JavaScript where you found little bits and pieces on how to validate data coming in. It's coming in on a text box. You want to check it before you send it back to the database. You want to scan for maybe those little disastrous payloads that someone like me knows how to drop in a text box to see if you have a SQL injection or a weakness for cross-site scripting. I say that for Mike on the phone too, because in my bag I happen to have found when I was rooting in there the secure coding practices document that's about 17 pages from OWASP that I had to pull out for someone at school that the other day I wanted to show them. You know, this is the kind of stuff you need to be doing when you're writing the code. But none of that's in this code here. Disclaimer for Mike. So yeah, but that's the kind of stuff you're going to do. So you're going to start to develop, if you're into JavaScript or whatever language you're in, you're going to develop these little snippets of code that you like to use over and over because you think it's cool, it does something neat, you understand it. You know, because you've used it a few times, you wrote it yourself, you listened to Ron talk and you said, well, I didn't like the way he did it, you made yours a little better. You want to get that together. And this is how you manage it. So now you have all these little JavaScript files that you can keep stacking in there. And you use the namespace pattern. And the way the namespace, you'll see it in the top here, this is the function, you steal it, you just change that var name to whatever it is. This could be the Jeff gang of 4, or Jeff's library, or Marcus's cool stuff, you know, whatever it is you want to call it. And then you just use that and you start loading in whatever script file you need, and it won't collide with one another. Because you might name your variables the same thing from file to file, but if you go to put those two files together, you might walk on your own variables. This helps because if you're doing this revealing module pattern, and you're using namespaces, you're not going to walk on your own code, let alone somebody else's. So that's why you do, in the JavaScript side of things, at least these two patterns. And there's more, but I'm not covering them here because I don't do it all the time. And I would probably say something wrong. So let's get back to the creational patterns. So creational patterns, these are about things that create things, right? Makes sense, creational? This is when objects are instantiated. How many here have heard of the factory pattern or a factory or have seen it in your code? Java has it, JavaScript. I don't know if it has it. It does now. But that's what we're gonna do. But you create factories. In .NET, we have the DB provider factory. And then there's the DB provider factories, something like that. But it's a factory that makes the other little factories, because one might be SQL Server provider and the other one might be Oracle provider. So, but they're all written in an extensible way and similar, so that this factory can go and generate other factories depending on what it's determined you need. You send in, maybe you have it looking at a block of code coming in like, oh, wait a minute, that's PL SQL. He needs an Oracle factory. It spins it up for you. Depends on, we're talking about a really big system here where a lot of crazy stuff's going on. So, but you have different factories. And I'm probably down the wrong one. Oh yeah, so this was one I wrote. I didn't even convert it back to JavaScript. This is from the C# rant. So factory is just an object. It's an abstract factory. It has your base abstract code. An abstract class is a class, for those who don't understand it, it's a class that has code in it. But you never instantiate it. You kind of make a copy of it. You use it to make another class. Okay. It's a way to make a class that already has usable code in it that you can start with. It's abstract when you're there, but when you use it to make another class, it becomes a concrete class. Okay. Did I confuse everyone on that? Okay. So I'm using a lot of terms. I don't want to over talk it. But that's what's going on here. So if you look at the diagram, here's your abstract factory, makes a concrete class, or it does a lookup here, and you call create. And when it does the create, so you can make multiple of whatever. In this case, it was a product. So this factory is producing products, whatever that product is. And they're based on this abstract product. The arrows are kind of confusing, but that's basically the way it works. So the abstract product is being used by the concrete factory to make other products. Hopefully that made sense. The arrows never did to me either. I always felt that the abstract should be displayed differently, but this is a standard drawing from the books. So in a nutshell, what I've done here in all of these creational, structural, and behavioral ones, if you go through, they'll find JavaScript code, and what's here is written in pure JavaScript. All right, what's going on is just general JavaScript. You'll go through it and it runs. You know, you'll notice this one doesn't have a namespace. I'm scrolling too fast for people probably, especially at home, sorry. You'll see I've declared a log here. And this is my log. I do it in all the classes for regular JavaScript. And I'm using this log everywhere. This is kind of my general one. Because of the way that's declared in that global scope, it's hanging out there all by itself as its own little guy on that global scope, which means anybody can call it. jQuery could call it. Jeff's library could call it. Anyone could call it. It's in the global scope. All right. So that's out there. So now in my JavaScript file, I created an employee factory, a vendor factory, and a vendor object. And as you can see, I have to stop and look at it myself. Okay. So what you see here is I basically created pretty close to class. You know, these are not, you'll notice it's not a function. This is just, it's a function, but it's not the kind I was using in the revealing pattern. I've just declared a function. It's not really a class, it's a function. In my mind, this doesn't meet the qualification of a class because this name and this say function, they're still kind of accessible. They're public. You can call them. They're not private. I like my stuff neat and hidden. That's what classes are about. So I don't consider this one a class where the function I would do in a revealing module pattern would be. And that's actually in the next example on this. So I've got employee, I got vendor factory, and I got vendor. Well, let's scroll down here. So now I'm going to run this. So I'm going to set up an array of persons. All right. And in here, I'm going to create a couple factories. I'm going to create an employee factory and a vendor factory, because that's what was up here, employee and vendor. All right. So we get down here, oops. And then I'm going to load the arrays. So I'm using employee factory to create this. put Anita in there and Pete, everyone, they get pushed into the persons. And then I go through and I use the vendor factory to add them to push them into the persons array. All right. Okay, they're different. All right. Then I run through a little for loop there. It says say, whatever, and it's just building out that message thing. Because say, see this say, if we go back up at the say, where is it here? Say is a function that calls log add from that log function I have hanging out there on the global scope. So now everybody who's calling that, and just to point out the weakness, these guys are calling it, but another part, an application could probably catch it too and hook into it. And, it's just the way it is. So it's not private enough for me. I thought I closed that. All right. So down here, so it does all that, and then we go and call log show function, and there it is. Everybody was added to the array. That's kind of the factory concept. You see how that it made it based on the different types of vendor. Hi, I'm an employee. Hi, I'm a vendor. Let's run that again. You'll see that how it labels out there. All right. So we go down here. We have optimized, and I stole the optimized name from Jeff. No, not Jeff. I stole it from Jack, the guy who taught me the class in architecture. And in here, here's what we're doing. Look familiar? The namespace pattern. Here we go again. And we're building out an abstract factory. And in that factory, we're making a family here, and we're doing a pet. What's going on? I mixed it up. Okay. So we got a family. We have a pet. What happened to the children? Family, factory, pets. Maybe I was only tricking pets here. It's been a while. I should have ran this. I wrote this 5 years ago, so bear with me. But you can see I have the revealing. It's the revealing module pattern. So I created all that. We have a family factory and a pet factory. And there's a little condensed stuff going on here. I have a pet. There it is, family, pet, family factory, and pet factory. They're revealed here. So now when I come down here, here I am, my abstract, load my abstract factory, and then I'm using the new function here to create a new abstract factory there of a family factory and then a pet factory. And then I'm doing the same thing I was doing down here, but I don't have to worry about collisions now with things. And it basically does the same thing, but it's a nicer, tighter package. The code is more organized. And if you go through, it's kind of teaching you the concept of a factory. We're using one object to create other little objects of certain types. All right. Now, obviously, I'm not going to get through all of these, which is why you're going to want to have the code. How much time do we got? 0. All right. So we have the same thing here, creational patterns, structural patterns, the exact description, just to stay on track here. This is why I have the paper. So you just can't cover all this one thing. So a structural pattern, obviously creational instantiates and creates something. In here, structural deals more on how the things are composed to make larger structures. Okay. Hence structural pattern. All right. And this involves the use of inheritance. And in JavaScript, you can do what's called prototypical inheritance because you have the prototype. So you go and take that blank prototype, you stick your little design into it. Do I got any here? Let's try flyweight. In here, did I use prototype in that? Probably not. But the point is, if you go through and read this code and work through it, you'll be good to go, is what's going on. So everything is there, and I keep scrolling, I keep forgetting people are online. All right. So structural patterns, it's that behavioral chain of responsibility. Is it chain of responsibility? Yeah, chain. How many here use jQuery? Who in C# uses fluent validation? Who does lambdas?
I don't use these terms. I use a lot of
You use a lot of fluent stuff. All right. Well, here you go. Fluent stuff. So I digressed and got too far off the track here, but is it fluent? Let me look here. Chain of responsibility. No. Yes. Okay. Look familiar? Where do you think it gets its chain from? The term chain of responsibility. Well, how many languages now we do lambdas, things like that, where we're adding on. In JavaScript, you do that with a lot of things too, where you can do one thing, dot another, and dot another. That's chaining. These are basic design patterns from before, well before there was JavaScript. That's the other thing about these patterns. We're talking, I believe it was 1997. I skipped over the history part. There's just too much to cover. So yeah, in 1997 is when the book was written. Gang of Four. Most of you weren't born then, I would guess. A couple of us, maybe, you know who you are. But yeah, so yes, I lived through that time. And this is when we were trying to figure things out. That's what led to these basic patterns. There's a pattern. Who thinks they can tell me what the, oh, I'm in the wrong one. Here it is. The iterator pattern's about. Some of these patterns are really small, but you use them in a language. What's a for loop? What's a for each loop? What's it do? It iterates through a list of things. That's an iterator pattern, people. Some of these are used, like the observer pattern in C#, and Java for various things, but there's those who had to suffer through JavaScript's product called Knockout. And who here knows what Knockout is? Be thankful you've been spared. It's JavaScript that does observables, which basically, you have a web page, right? Somebody types in the web page. It's a way to set stuff up where it detects it's watching where you're typing in that box, and then it decides to go do something. That's a loose description. You can correct me later. Upon change. So once you finish typing in that box, press enter, right? And it says, hey, I know we pressed enter. What am I supposed to do with what's in that box? So it's watching what's going on that HTML page. Because it's JavaScript running inside your page, right? And then it knows, well, he's moved off of that box, he's finished typing, yes, the data's changed. What am I supposed to do with it? Maybe async, maybe through a AJAX call or something, kick it back to a back-end system and pump it into the database. Okay, but that's an observer pattern. And that's a tool none of you heard about, and be thankful you don't want to know about. But those are the painful years of JavaScript. And Microsoft actually used that with jQuery and stuffed it into the early MVC models around 2013, I believe it was, 2014. 2013 was a wild year for me. Yeah. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on, but that's an observer pattern. So why are design patterns important? A memento pattern. Well, you can kind of think about that. Mediator pattern. I know we've talked a few things with the mediator pattern. These are things you can do. State. How many are wondering the different states of data in their program? This is basically what we're talking about here. And these little examples will explain that to you. So they'll help get you on the concept. What's happened, and when you go look at those enterprise and those other ones I put links in the PowerPoint for, they're just derivatives. You know, these little patterns, these 23 basic patterns get used to build these other patterns. They got used to build languages. Probably a quarter or more of these have been used to build out all the languages you're using in some form or another. Obviously, the prototype pattern, which was before JavaScript, but if you look plain out in the language of JavaScript, you have prototypes. You have a prototype with every function. It's every function gets a prototype, but there's a catch to it. I don't remember what it is. There's a period, depending how it's declared, it doesn't get a prototype. But for the most part, everyone gets a prototype. Like I said, I have so much information that's going in and most of it's falling out the other side. So, but yeah, so there's a reason you should learn these because these are the great granddaddies of the computer stuff you're trying to do. Everything is an abstraction. I used to write, I'm going to go off a tangent and just finish this off. This code will all be available and everything. But in the old days, we used to write data files. Now, you all know what a flat CSV file is, right? Or a flat file, it's tab delimited and all that. Before there were databases, we used to write these huge files of data synchronously. Everybody know what a linked list is? For those in college, they teach you those basic algorithms. I'm one of those crazy people. We used to store data in linked lists. Store a piece of data, in the front of it, it had the marker for the piece of data in front of it and so on. So basically it had a little number that you could track it with. All right. Well, how do you go find data in one long list? It's like you're scrolling through a spreadsheet or whatever. You're just scrolling down looking for the data. Well, that's how we sorted data, and we just depended new data on the end. Well, it's not sorted in any alphabetical order, but all this data, and this data today in every database is kept the same way. Deep down in SQL Server, deep down in Oracle, the data is still kept in what are called data pages. And it's just all contiguous. It just goes along. But we abstracted out different ways of y'all know your indices, right? You have indexes. What's used in those are called B-tree algorithms. B-tree algorithms is what we used to use the basic form and write our own code because we wrote our own data format for every new thing we were building. We had to write and create an index so we could index the data so that we could find it quickly. Okay, all that has been abstracted to different layers in every database. If you're using Postgres, it's the same thing under the covers. MySQL, deep down underneath, it's all the same thing. It's just they've abstracted different layers of code on top of all the old stuff from decades ago so that you can do things faster and easier. So now I call select this or whatever, it knows that based on the statement, maybe underneath the covers, the database engine goes, is there an index? You do a select whatever on whatever with a where clause. Okay, underneath there, the database engine goes like, optimization engine, is there an index on that table in that raw data? And he goes, yeah, there's one on first name, and he's asking for first name. And all these layers of software are filtering through to get at that data that's still kept in that crude format we wrote decades ago. Anyone who uses SQL Server here? Go look at the DBCC, Database Console Commands. It's basically your commands that we had to use before they built that whole fancy interface to look at the underneath. And only database administrators, which I happen to be certified as one of those too, to go down and I can get at the raw with that command and group of commands. You can get at the raw data kept on the pages in memory on disk. Okay, you bypass all that layer of abstraction software on top of it. In all the old databases are the same way. So I digress. Hopefully you learned something. We'll get the address to my GitHub for all this code. Any questions on it, just shoot it to me. I use Chocolatey to manage all the software on my laptop. If you have Apple, I don't know what you use for that, but she smiles, she must use Apple. So, oh yeah, so neither do I. Yeah, so I use that to manage all my code or things that are on there. So my Chrome gets managed, my Firefox, but I can use that Chocolatey, go look it up, to load Node on your machine. You could do you to load Python on your machine, and then you use the Chocolatey GUI, and you use that, and you just look and say, oh, what's out of date? And all the new updates that get published every week keeps your, it's an easy way to manage this stuff on your laptop. All right. But this code is there. We can get, you know, if anyone wants, this is by demand. Like I said, I did this back in 2018. Yeah, in 2018, it was just before I started the 21st century. They, this is old, so I'm going to put it out there. And if I don't know if anyone ever wants to go through this kind of thing again, but we could always go deeper. I don't know if we're going to start hands-on. Remember, we were doing that before everything went down. Yeah, you know, we could pick a target for code collabs, or we could get back into that situation where it's just where we meet up and whatever you want to talk about. And then I show up with my laptop, he shows up with his or whatever, and, you know, we talk geek and help out with stuff. Because I am a full DBA, I'm a data architect, but I'm a software architect. Everything. So we can work on that kind of stuff. I had put stuff out there originally on how you, if you wanted to get started with SQL Server, what you need to get all the free stuff to set it up on your machine and learn how to do an enterprise level database. You know, that's the kind of stuff we could do in a code collab if somebody wanted to do that. I hope that was helpful. I hope I didn't bore you. But like I said, all this will be available. It runs, the PowerPoint's there. And if you have any questions, you can email me. I'm not quick to respond in email. And which my wife, you know, shall we say, same with text messages. I'm a little sluggish, you know. Yeah, I'm on Slack, but I'm only on Slack on the phone, so I can't really send you stuff, which is why you get mostly programming memes is what I post. Yes, programming memes, like I made that one. This guy right here, where is he? F5. Oops. Yes, I made that because I was bored. I stole the GIF, obviously, but that's all me. But yeah. So yeah. All right, that's it. Too much information.
Design patterns have been on my mind lately. Refactoring that the website. Really well done. And I think some training sites.
Yeah, there's a lot of sites out there. A lot of them just specialize like in JavaScript or Python or whatever. The courses that the Data Object Factory sells has, when you buy it, like you get a reference application that you could actually, some of them like the Patterns in Action series, it's actually a base application written in whatever in .NET, the latest standards, and it's how you learn how to do an enterprise program.
Yeah.
Where I didn't show it, I went and blew past that enterprise screen where it showed the layered diagrams on how to, that's how you design and build out a system with separation of concerns and the whole 9 yards. Hey. So somebody shut me up. Yeah.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So it's fair to say that some of the concepts and these abstractions that you're representing here are already taken into account into some of the quote unquote modern frameworks, but this concept are still useful even if you're using a framework.
The Gang of Four is used everywhere. Okay, if you go looking through the J2EE and you go looking through the .NET framework, you will find stuff appended, factory this, observer that, command this. Those are direct references to the patterns they're based on out of the Gang of Four. Obviously, the Iterator pattern, well, that's a smaller, more granular thing, but a for loop, for each loop, things like that, where it iterates over data, that's the Iterator pattern. It's a pattern. You know what you're talking about. If I tell you in whatever language you're using, I need you to download this package of records from the database, and I want you to iterate through them and put them on the screen or send an email to each person, whatever. You understand what I mean by iterate. And these blocks of code will, at least conceptually, JavaScript wise, show you that. The principles are the same. It's the implementation from language to language get implemented differently. So that's why I went through the whole household rant with building the house with the wife and all that, because it's the concept, the abstraction, so that you can talk. So now you're working a job, and obviously there's more advanced patterns. Somebody comes in and I say, I walk into Marcus and we're doing SOA, which is service-oriented architecture. And we're all doing the old web service stuff. And then the boss comes in and says, okay, we're going to try and take all our web services and we're going to turn them into RESTful APIs. Well, the whole concept of RESTful is a higher level pattern, and it's also a procedure. Patterns, design patterns, there's a crossover from actual there being a pattern of something physical or whatever, but it's also like Martin Fowler. If you go look at those links, Martin Fowler used the term pattern, but he didn't like the term pattern. Practices. He said it should be practice. So you need an iterator practice because it's different for each one. You need to practice doing it. But you need good practices or best practices. Anybody heard the term best practices? It's that crossover stage, patterns to that, to more formalize, this is how we want you to do it. A design pattern's a way, this is how I want you to do it. So if the boss tells you, I want you to build an MVC application, most of you are familiar with the higher level patterns. MVC, we all know what MVC is, right? Okay, MVVM, okay. The MV patterns, model view, there's model view controller, there's model view presenter. All right, model view model. Yeah. But there's all variations. So there's the higher level ones and there's the lower level ones. These are the lower level ones, the granular ones. They're the little basic Lego blocks before you can build that great Millennium Falcon one that's out there. But you get the general idea. So think of these as the Lego blocks for all the others. They may have been the Lego block for a language that you're using, because you have a for loop in JavaScript. Every language has a for loop, and so on. And that's it, unless you got more questions. All right. I actually did this presentation. I started off. So I left American Express. I left because I was being forced to learn Node.js. And like I said, I drank the Microsoft Kool-Aid and I thought it was wrong. You don't, like I said, you don't do transaction processing with an interpreted language with all the security risks. That's just me. But everybody has their own opinion. Some people that with bigger salaries make these other decisions, and then the other people got to go implement it. I didn't go implement it. I took the package and walked and everything. And it's what happens. But yeah, but I still play with it. Normally I'm an API back to the database person. I'll architect, I have architected whole systems at a high level and brought in a team of programmers and divide up work. Marcus has worked with me on a project where at one point there were 4 of us in the code and everybody got their piece of code and I was the guy herding all the pieces together into the bigger app. Now they're stuck with it. That's a whole nother story. But yeah, so that, yeah, it's basically, I wrote this because I try to stay frosty and learn new things. So the idea was to take the C# pattern, the basic gang of 4, here they are in C#. You can get the same book in Java. Okay, so the same efforts get turned in because they're all applicable. It's just the difference in here. The samples are written in C#. There's another version. I'm not sure whether it's Java or it could be C that the PDF that I linked you to has. But you go learn from that, that kind of thing. But the point is the patterns are reusable. It's a concept, like driving a car. And it helps when a large team.